The council chamber was the largest room Taman had ever seen. The ceiling stretched so high that clouds could form up there. The walls were made of some kind of crystal that changed colors based on the mood of the speakers. Right now, they were glowing an angry red. Not a good sign. Taman stood in the center of the massive room. Around him, seated on floating platforms that circled the chamber like a giant amphitheater, were representatives from 300 different alien species. Some had tentacles, some had scales, some looked like walking plants. One species was just a cloud of gas held together by a force field. But they all had one thing in common today. They were all staring at him. He adjusted his simple black suit and waited. The humans had been invited to join the Galactic Council only 5 years ago. Before that, nobody in the galaxy even knew Earth existed. Humanity had been too busy fighting each other to notice the thousands of alien civilizations all around them. When first contact finally happened, the aliens had been surprised. Most species discovered space travel and immediately started exploring. Humans had discovered space travel and used it to put weapons in orbit. The High Commander of the Vexar Dominion rose from his platform. He was 12 feet tall, covered in dark purple armor that seemed to be part of his body. He had 4 arms and 3 eyes arranged in a triangle on his face. When he spoke, his voice boomed through the chamber without need for speakers. The speech was long, very long. The commander talked about honor and territory and ancient rights. He talked about how the Vexar Dominion had existed for 10,000 years. He talked about their glorious military tradition. He showed holographic images of their fleet, 5,000 warships, each one bigger than a city. He showed images of their weapons, plasma cannons that could melt a mountain, missiles that could crack a planet. He talked about how many worlds they had conquered. Finally, he got to the point. The Vexar Dominion wanted the star system next to Earth. There were valuable resources there. Mining rights, strategic position, the usual reasons. And because humanity was new to the galactic community and had no powerful allies, the Dominion had decided to simply take it. They were declaring war. The commander finished his speech with a dramatic flourish. Holographic fire exploded behind him. The crystal walls turned blood red. His 3 eyes locked onto Taman with what was probably meant to be an intimidating stare. The entire council chamber fell silent. Every alien representative leaned forward to see how the human would respond. Taman reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. Several alien guards tensed, hands moving to weapons, but Taman pulled out something that made everyone pause in confusion. It was a newspaper, an actual physical newspaper printed on real paper, the kind of thing most species had stopped using thousands of years ago. He unfolded it slowly. The rustling sound seemed incredibly loud in the quiet chamber. Taman held it up and started reading. His eyes moved across the pages. He turned to the second page, then the third. He seemed completely absorbed in whatever article he was reading. The High Commander's purple armor began to darken, a sign of growing anger in his species. A full minute passed, then 2. The tension in the room grew thicker. Some aliens started whispering to each other. Was this a human custom? Some kind of ritual and insult? The commander's 3 eyes narrowed. His 4 hands clenched into fists. Finally, Taman looked up from the newspaper. He folded it neatly and tucked it under his arm. Then he did something that shocked everyone in the chamber. He laughed. Not a polite chuckle. Not a nervous giggle. A real, genuine laugh that echoed through the massive room. He laughed so hard he had to wipe tears from his eyes. The crystal walls flickered through a dozen different colors. Unable to process the conflicting emotions in the room. Confusion, anger, fear, curiosity. The High Commander took a step forward, his platform moving closer to the center of the chamber. Taman's laughter finally subsided. He wiped his eyes one more time and took a deep breath. Then he looked directly at the commander. His smile was still there, but his eyes were serious now. He walked over to the central podium and placed the newspaper on top of it. The holographic projectors in the room immediately scanned it and displayed the front page for everyone to see. It was that morning's edition of the Earth Times. The main headline was about a new trade agreement with the Delphian Consortium. There was a picture of a sports team celebrating a victory. Weather forecasts, stock market reports, entertainment news. Completely ordinary things. Nothing about war or fleets or declarations. The commander's confusion was visible even through his armor. What was the point of this? Was the human mocking him? Ignoring the declaration of war? Showing disrespect? All of the above? Taman tapped the newspaper with his finger. When he spoke, his voice was calm and friendly, like he was explaining something to a child. He pointed to a small article on page 7. It was only 3 paragraphs long, squeezed between an advertisement for coffee and a comic strip. The headline read, "Local Defense Fleet Completes Readiness Drill." The human ambassador started to speak. His words were simple and clear. He explained that he had been reading the morning news while the commander gave his speech. He apologized for the rudeness but noted that the speech had been quite long and he had wanted to stay informed about current events. The laugh, he explained, had been involuntary. He had just reached the sports section where his favorite team had won an important game. But now back to business. Taman looked around the chamber, making eye contact with as many representatives as possible. He wanted to make sure everyone was paying attention to what he was about to say. The crystal walls had settled into a nervous yellow color. Even the gas cloud species had stopped drifting and formed into a more attentive shape. Taman began his response. He thanked the High Commander for the formal declaration. It was very polite, he said, to give advance notice. Many species throughout history had not been so courteous. He complimented the impressive display of the Vexar fleet. The ships did indeed look quite powerful. The holographic presentation had been very well done. Professional quality. Then his tone changed slightly. He mentioned that humanity appreciated the warning because it gave them time to finish their morning coffee before responding. He gestured to the newspaper again. That little article on page 7, the defense drill it mentioned, that had actually been completed 3 months ago, right around the time Earth's intelligence services first detected the Vexar fleet movements. The chamber's temperature seemed to drop several degrees. Taman smiled again, but it was a different kind of smile now. He told the commander that they should probably talk. Really talk. Because there were some things about humanity that the Dominion might want to know before making any final decisions about this whole war situation. The High Commander stood motionless on his platform. His 3 eyes were wide now. His armor had turned a pale purple, almost white. Around the chamber, alien representatives began whispering urgently to each other. Some were accessing data files. Others were making rapid calculations. A few were already quietly leaving. Taman picked up his newspaper, tucked it back under his arm, and waited politely for the commander to decide whether he wanted to continue this conversation. The crystal walls had turned a very interesting shade of blue. In the galactic color code, blue meant one thing: recognition of a serious threat. Colonel Soo-hyun stepped forward from where he had been standing behind Taman. He was wearing a military uniform, crisp and clean, with medals that caught the light. He moved to the podium with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this many times before. His face was calm, almost bored, which somehow made him more intimidating than if he had been angry. He placed a small device on the podium. It projected a holographic display that filled the space above the center of the chamber. The aliens watched as images began to appear. Soo-hyun did not waste time with introductions. He simply started talking, his voice clear and matter-of-fact. The first image showed Earth. The blue and green planet hung in space, looking peaceful and beautiful. Then the timeline began. It started 3,000 years in the past and moved forward rapidly. Red dots appeared on the planet's surface. Each dot represented a war. Small ones for border conflicts, large ones for major wars. The dots multiplied. They spread. They covered the entire planet like a disease. The galactic representatives watched in growing horror. The red dots never stopped. They pulsed and flashed and grew and shrank, but they never disappeared completely. Not for a single year. Not for a single month. For 3,000 years of recorded history somewhere on Earth, humans were fighting other humans. Soo-hyun explained in a calm voice that this was only the recent history. If they went back further, they would find more of the same. Humans had been fighting each other since before they had written language. They had been fighting each other since before they had metal weapons. They had been fighting each other with sticks and stones and bare hands since the very beginning of their species. The High Commander shifted on his platform. His 3 eyes were fixed on the display. Other aliens were accessing their own databases, checking the information. It was all true. Every piece of data could be verified. Earth's history was an unbroken chain of violence. The holographic display changed. Now it showed weapons, swords from ancient times, cannons from a few hundred years ago, machine guns, tanks, missiles, nuclear weapons. Each innovation was marked with a date and a brief explanation. Soo-hyun pointed out something interesting. Every major technological advancement in human history had been driven by military needs. Humans had not developed better engines to explore the stars. They had developed better engines to deliver bombs faster. The display showed numbers now, casualties from various conflicts. The numbers were staggering. Millions dead in some wars, tens of millions in others. The largest war in human history had killed over 70 million people in just 6 years. 6 years. Some of the alien species in the chamber had not lost that many individuals to disease and natural disasters in their entire recorded history. But here was the terrifying part, Soo-hyun explained. After that massive war, after losing 70 million people, after destroying huge portions of their own planet, humans did not stop fighting. They learned from it. They studied it. They wrote books about it. They made sure every generation knew exactly how it had happened and what tactics had worked best. The display changed again. This time it showed military academies, schools dedicated entirely to the study of warfare. Earth had hundreds of them. Students spent years learning about logistics, strategy, tactics, and history. Every battle that had ever been fought was analyzed in detail. What worked? What failed? Why? How could it be done better next time? Soo-hyun walked around the podium gesturing to the images. He explained that military service was common on Earth. Many countries required it. Others made it a respected career path. Millions of humans trained specifically for combat. They learned to fight in every possible environment. Jungle, desert, mountains, Arctic conditions, underwater, in space, on the surface of airless moons. The colonel paused and looked directly at the High Commander. He asked a simple question. How many wars had the Vexar Dominion fought in the last 1,000 years? The commander's armor darkened. He answered reluctantly. 7 wars, 7 conflicts in 1,000 years. An impressive military record by galactic standards. Soo-hyun nodded politely. Then he brought up another display. Earth had fought 7 wars in the last 50 years. 50 years, not 1,000, and those were just the major conflicts that everyone agreed to call wars. If they counted smaller military operations, peacekeeping missions, counter-terrorism actions, and border disputes, the number jumped to over 200. The chamber was completely silent now. Even the species that communicated through sound waves had gone quiet. The crystal walls had turned a pale gray, the color of shock, but Soo-hyun was not finished. The display changed once more. Now it showed something that made several aliens recoil in horror. It showed human entertainment. Movies about war, television shows about soldiers, video games where players commanded armies or fought as individual soldiers, books, millions of books about military history, strategy, and fictional conflicts. Children on Earth played with toy soldiers. Teenagers competed in strategy games that simulated historical battles. Adults paid money to watch dramatic recreations of famous wars. Humans did not just study warfare as a necessary skill. They turned it into entertainment. They made it part of their culture. Soo-hyun explained that human languages had hundreds of words related to warfare. Military terms had become part of everyday speech. People used tactical language to describe sports games. They used strategic terms to discuss business. War metaphors were everywhere in human communication. The colonel brought up another image. This one showed the organizational structure of Earth's combined military forces. The complexity was overwhelming. Every branch had specialized units: infantry, artillery, armor, aviation, naval forces, space forces, special operations, intelligence, logistics, medical, engineering. Each branch had multiple levels of command. Each level had specific responsibilities and training requirements. And this was just the formal military. Soo-hyun added that Earth also had reserve forces, civilian populations trained in basic military skills who could be mobilized quickly, veterans who had left active service but remembered their training, private military contractors, security forces, police organizations with military-grade equipment and training. The display showed personnel numbers. Earth had over 200 million people with some form of military training currently alive. If war was declared, that number could potentially triple as older veterans came out of retirement and younger citizens enlisted. 200 million trained fighters. The entire Vexar Dominion had a total population of only 500 million across all their worlds. Soo-hyun walked back to stand beside Taemin. He turned off the holographic display. The chamber seemed darker without it. He made one final point. Everything he had just shown them was public information. None of it was classified. Any species could have learned all of this by simply reading Earth's publicly available databases and history books. The High Commander's armor had turned almost white now. Around the chamber, aliens were having urgent conversations with their advisors. Some were frantically checking databases. Others were recalculating the odds. A few had already started backing toward the exits. Taemin stepped forward again. He still had that slight smile on his face. He thanked Soo-hyun for the informative presentation. Then he looked up at the High Commander and asked a simple question. Did the Commander still wish to proceed with the declaration of war? Or would he perhaps like to hear more about what humanity had been doing for the 3 months since they first detected the Vexar fleet movement? The crystal walls flickered through several colors before settling on dark blue. The color of fear, real genuine fear. The kind of fear that came from realizing you had made a terrible mistake. The kind of fear that came from understanding that you had just threatened something far more dangerous than you had ever imagined. The High Commander sat back down on his platform. He did not speak. He simply gestured for Taemin to continue. Around the chamber, every alien representative leaned forward, desperate to hear what came next. They needed to know what humanity had been planning. They needed to know if this threat could be stopped. Most importantly, they needed to know if they should start worrying about their own worlds. A woman in a gray jumpsuit walked to the center of the chamber. Her name was Engineer Hyejin, and she looked like she had not slept in several days. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. She carried a tablet computer and seemed more interested in its screen than in the hundreds of aliens staring at her. This casual attitude was somehow more unsettling than any amount of military posturing would have been. Hyejin connected her tablet to the chamber's holographic system. Images appeared in the air above them. These were not historical timelines or weapons displays. These were blueprints, factory schematics, industrial complexes, shipyards, manufacturing facilities. The sheer scale of what she was showing made several aliens gasp audibly. She started talking in a voice that suggested she was explaining something very obvious. Earth had a population of 11 billion people. Those people needed things. Food, shelter, transportation, entertainment, medicine. All the normal requirements of a civilization. But Earth also produced something else on a massive scale. Military equipment. The holographic display zoomed in on specific locations. Here was a factory that produced ammunition. Not a small facility. This single factory could produce 10 million rounds per day. And Earth had 50 factories just like it. The math was staggering. 500 million rounds of ammunition every single day. That was more than the entire Vexar military used in a typical year. But ammunition was simple. Hyejin moved on to more complex items. Shipyards. Earth had 120 orbital shipyards capable of building military vessels. Each yard could construct multiple ships simultaneously. The current production rate was 30 new warships per month. Every month, without interruption, the Vexar Dominion had built their fleet of 5,000 ships over a period of 200 years. Earth could match that number in just under 14 years. The High Commander's 3 eyes were wider now. He was doing the calculations in his head. If humans could build that many ships that quickly during peacetime, what could they do during an actual war? Hyejin smiled slightly as if she had heard his thoughts. She brought up another display that answered that exact question. During the last major war on Earth, human industrial production had increased by a factor of 10. Factories that made consumer goods were converted to military production within months. Civilian shipyards started building warships. Automobile plants started making tanks. Every available resource had been redirected toward the war effort. If Earth went to full war production now, with their current technology and population, they could build 300 ships per month. 300 ships. Every month. The Vexar Dominion could lose their entire fleet, and Earth could replace it in less than 2 years. The implications were terrifying. This was not a civilization that had some military capability. This was a civilization built around the concept of industrial warfare. Hyejin continued her presentation. She showed them Earth's resource extraction operations, asteroid mining, lunar factories, gas harvesting from the outer planets. Earth had been aggressively developing their solar system for decades. Every planet, every moon, every large asteroid had been surveyed and categorized. Valuable resources were already being extracted and processed. Most civilizations developed their home systems slowly over centuries. They built what they needed and no more. Earth had approached it differently. They had built as if preparing for something, as if they expected to need vast amounts of raw materials at some point, as if they were preparing for war before they even knew there was anyone to fight. The display changed to show another interesting detail. Every single human colony, even the small ones, had weapons manufacturing capability. Every space station had ammunition stores and repair facilities. Every settlement on every moon had underground bunkers and defensive systems. Earth had not just militarized their home planet. They had militarized their entire sphere of influence. Then Hyejin brought up something that made the military representatives in the chamber lean forward with sudden interest. Logistics. The boring, unglamorous business of moving supplies and personnel. Most species found logistics tedious. Humans had turned it into an art form. Earth had 10,000 cargo vessels capable of moving military supplies. They had automated systems for loading and unloading. They had pre-positioned supply depots scattered throughout their territory. They had detailed plans for moving army groups, fleet squadrons, and entire divisions across interstellar distances. Plans that could be activated within hours. A military force was only as good as its supply chain. Soldiers needed food, water, ammunition, medical supplies, spare parts, fuel, and 1,000 other things. Ships needed maintenance. Equipment broke down. Injured personnel needed evacuation. Most species struggled with these issues. They planned for short conflicts close to home where supply lines were manageable. Humans had fought wars on the other side of their own planet. They had learned to project force across vast distances while maintaining supply lines. They had developed entire military branches dedicated solely to logistics. They had turned the movement of supplies into a precise science with its own schools, specialists, and doctrine. Now another person joined Hyejin at the podium. This was Dr. Jiwoo, wearing a white medical coat over casual clothes. He looked friendly and approachable, like someone who spent his time helping people, which made what he was about to explain even more disturbing. Jiwoo brought up medical data. He started with basic biology. Humans were remarkably durable compared to most galactic species. Their bodies had redundant systems. 2 kidneys when one would suffice. 2 lungs. A heart that could continue functioning even with significant damage. Bones that could break and heal back stronger than before. Human pain tolerance was higher than average. Their bodies produced natural chemicals that reduced pain and increased endurance during stress. They could function with injuries that would incapacitate most other species. Broken bones, lacerations, burns. Humans had been documented continuing to fight with wounds that should have killed them, but the real advantage was not physical toughness. It was human medical technology. Jiwoo showed them field hospitals, mobile surgical units, medical ships. Earth had spent thousands of years developing ways to keep wounded soldiers alive and return them to combat. They had become very good at it. The survival rate for wounded human soldiers was over 90%. Injuries that would mean certain death for a Vexar warrior could be treated and healed in human facilities. Lost limbs could be replaced with cybernetic prosthetics. Organ damage could be repaired. Even severe trauma to the brain could sometimes be treated successfully. This meant that in a prolonged conflict, humans would maintain their fighting strength longer. Each wounded soldier was likely to return to duty. Meanwhile, other species would see their forces steadily diminished. The math was brutal. In a war of attrition, humanity had a significant advantage. Jiwoo also mentioned human disease resistance. Earth was a biological nightmare world by galactic standards. Thousands of species of bacteria, viruses, parasites, and fungi. Humans had evolved in constant warfare with microscopic enemies. Their immune systems were aggressive and adaptable. Many diseases that could devastate other species barely affected humans. Finally, another figure stepped forward. This was Professor Minho, an older man with gray hair and an academic demeanor. He taught military history at one of Earth's universities. He had brought something interesting to show the council. Minho activated the display and showed them human entertainment media. Not the news or educational content. Pure entertainment, movies, books, games, television shows, all focused on war, conflict, survival, and apocalypse. The sheer volume was overwhelming. Humans made entertainment about alien invasions. about nuclear war, about zombie apocalypses, about robot uprisings, about natural disasters, about every possible way their civilization could be destroyed. And in these stories, humans always fought back. They always found ways to survive. They always won eventually, no matter how impossible the odds. This was not just entertainment. This was cultural conditioning. Human children grew up consuming stories about survival against overwhelming odds. They learned that fighting back was the expected response to any threat. They learned that surrender was not an option. They learned that even when facing extinction, humans should resist. The professor pointed out that humans had entire industries dedicated to imagining worst-case scenarios and planning responses. They called it preparedness or prepping. Citizens stockpiled food and supplies. They practiced emergency procedures. They taught their children survival skills. Some built underground shelters just in case of disaster. Most civilizations became complacent during peacetime. They forgot about war. They let their military skills atrophy. Not humans. Humans stayed ready. They stayed vigilant. They continued to prepare for threats that might never come. Because in their long history, threats always eventually came. The three presenters stood together in the center of the chamber. Heejin with her industrial data, Jiwoo with his medical knowledge, Minyo with his cultural analysis. Together they had painted a picture of a civilization that was fundamentally different from anything the galaxy had encountered before. A civilization that did not just have a military. A civilization that was, in many ways, entirely military. Taemin walked back to the center podium. He picked up his newspaper again. The gesture was now familiar to everyone in the chamber, but it still made them nervous. What else did that simple paper contain? What other information had humanity been casually reading over breakfast while the Vexar prepared for war? He unfolded it slowly, letting the silence build. Then he turned to page 7. That small article, the one about the defense drill. He held it up so the holographic scanners could project it large enough for everyone to read. The article was exactly 3 paragraphs long. Written in simple, everyday language, the kind of thing someone might skim while drinking coffee. Taemin read it aloud. The first paragraph mentioned that the Earth Defense Fleet had completed a routine readiness exercise. Good performance all around. No issues to report. The second paragraph noted that the exercise had tested long-range deployment capabilities and coordination with colonial defense forces. Everything went smoothly. The third paragraph mentioned that fleet personnel would be getting a few days of leave before returning to normal duties. That was it. 3 simple paragraphs, buried on page 7. Nothing dramatic, nothing classified. Just a routine news item that most humans had probably ignored completely while reading about sports or weather or celebrity gossip. Taemin looked up at the High Commander. Now, he said, let me tell you what that article did not say. Let me tell you what information was considered too routine, too ordinary, too boring to be worth mentioning in detail. The defense drill mentioned in the article had begun exactly 3 months ago. That was the same week that Earth's deep space monitoring stations first detected unusual movement in Vexar space. Fleet mobilizations, supply shipments, communication patterns consistent with war preparation. The humans had seen it all. So Earth had quietly activated their defense protocols, not with public announcements, not with dramatic speeches, just routine orders through normal channels. Ships moved to new positions. Personnel reported to duty stations. Supply depots were stocked. Defense platforms were powered up. All presented to the public as a simple readiness drill. Taemin activated his own holographic display. It showed the current positions of Earth's military forces. The aliens in the chamber stared in shock. There were human ships everywhere, not just around Earth, not just around human colonies. Everywhere. 3 complete battle groups were positioned within striking distance of every major Vexar military installation. Stealth reconnaissance ships had mapped every Vexar colony, every defense station, every shipyard, every fuel depot. Earth knew the exact location and current status of every single ship in the Vexar fleet. The High Commander was standing now. His forearms hung limply at his sides. His 3 eyes were locked on the display. How was this possible? The Vexar had the best sensor technology in the galaxy. They had not detected any unusual human activity. Their intelligence services had reported nothing. Taemin smiled that slight smile again. He explained that Earth's military had spent thousands of years learning to hide their movements from enemy observation. They called it operational security, deception, misdirection. Humans were very good at appearing to do one thing while actually doing something completely different. The display zoomed in on specific locations. Here was a human cargo convoy that Vexar intelligence had observed 3 months ago. Routine trade goods, according to their manifests. The ships had even stopped at Vexar customs stations and been inspected. Nothing suspicious found, except those ships had not been carrying trade goods. They had been carrying military supplies to pre-positioned storage sites near Vexar space. Here was a human scientific expedition that had asked permission to study an asteroid field near a Vexar colony. Permission granted. Scientists did their research and left. Very polite, very professional. Except those scientists had also been military survey specialists mapping the entire region and identifying optimal attack vectors. Here were 3 human trade stations that had been operating in neutral space for years. Legitimate businesses, regular customers, good relations with neighboring systems. Except those stations had been designed from the start to convert into forward military bases within 24 hours. The conversion had already been completed. Nobody had noticed. The High Commander sat back down heavily on his platform. Around the chamber, other military representatives were frantically checking their own defensive positions. Were human ships near their worlds too? Had their intelligence services also missed everything? But Taman was not finished. A new face appeared on the holographic display. This was Defense Minister Hanul, broadcasting live from Earth. She was a stern-looking woman in a formal military uniform. She did not smile. She did not waste time with pleasantries. She simply delivered her report. Earth's defensive posture was now at condition yellow. That meant full readiness without public alarm. All military personnel were at their stations. All ships were fueled and armed. All defensive systems were active. The civilian population had not been informed because there was no need to cause panic. Everything was handled quietly and efficiently. If war was declared, Earth would immediately move to condition red. Full combat operations. The transition would take approximately 4 hours. In that time, human fleets would move from their current positions to combat positions. First strikes would be launched. Vexar military capability would be significantly degraded before their commanders even finished mobilizing their forces. Hanul displayed probability calculations, wargame results, computer simulations. All showed the same result. In a direct military conflict between Earth and the Vexar Dominion, humanity won. Not eventually. Not through attrition. Not by calling in allies. They won quickly and decisively through overwhelming force applied with precision and coordination. The Vexar fleet would be destroyed in the opening engagement. Their colonies would be occupied within 3 weeks. Their core systems would be under human control within 2 months. Total victory within 6 months. And those were conservative estimates. The crystal walls of the chamber had turned completely white now. Pure shock. Complete disbelief. This could not be real. A species that had only joined the galactic community 5 years ago could not possibly have this level of military superiority over one of the oldest and most respected military powers in the galaxy. But every piece of data was verifiable. Every simulation could be checked. Every position could be confirmed. It was all true. Then another human appeared on the display. This was Captain Yuna. She was younger than the others, probably in her early 30s. She wore a Special Forces uniform, completely black with no identifying marks. She looked tired, like someone who had been working around the clock for weeks. Yuna's report was brief and to the point. Human special operations teams had infiltrated Vexar space over the past 3 months. They had mapped every major military installation. They had identified key personnel. They had located ammunition storage, fuel depots, command centers, and communication hubs. They had even managed to plant surveillance devices in several high-security locations. If necessary, those teams could conduct sabotage operations. Critical infrastructure could be destroyed. Supply chains could be disrupted. Key targets could be eliminated. All before the main fleets even engaged. The Vexar military would find themselves fighting blind and crippled while trying to face an enemy that knew everything about them. Yuna added one more detail that made several aliens gasp. Her teams had been operating inside Vexar space for 3 months, living among Vexar civilians, moving through high-security areas, accessing restricted information, and nobody had caught them. Nobody had even noticed them. Human Special Forces operators could pass for Vexar citizens well enough to fool trained security personnel. The High Commander was no longer sitting upright on his platform. He had slumped forward, his armor pale, his three eyes staring at nothing. Around the chamber, the noise level had increased dramatically. Aliens were arguing, panicking, demanding answers, making frantic calls to their home governments. Taman folded his newspaper one final time. He tucked it back into his jacket pocket. Then he walked over to stand directly below the High Commander's platform. He looked up and spoke in a voice that somehow carried through all the chaos. "Commander," he said, "I have shown you what we have been doing for 3 months. What we have been doing while you prepared your speech. What we have been doing while your fleet moved into position. What we have been doing while you convinced yourself that conquering Earth would be easy. Now I need you to make a choice. Do you still want this war? Because Earth is ready. We have been ready since the day we detected your first fleet movement. We will remain ready long after you make your decision. War is what we do. It is what we have always done. It is what we are very, very good at." The silence that followed Taman's words was absolute. Even the species that communicated through electromagnetic signals went quiet. The crystal walls had settled on a deep, dark blue. The color of a decision point. The color of a moment where everything could change. High Commander slowly stood up. His armor had regained some of its purple color, but it was darker now. Less confident. He looked around the chamber at the hundreds of alien representatives. Then he looked back down at Taman. When he spoke, his voice was much quieter than before. Gone was the booming confidence. Gone was the dramatic flair. The commander asked a simple question. Why? Why had Earth not simply destroyed the Vexar fleet when they first detected it 3 months ago? If humanity was so powerful, so prepared, so capable, why allow the Dominion to continue with their war plans? Why wait? Why permit this confrontation? Taman smiled, but this time it was a genuine, warm smile, not the slight knowing smile from before. He gestured for the High Commander to sit, and then he began to explain. Humanity had learned something important over thousands of years of constant warfare. War was easy to start. It was easy to fight. It was much harder to stop. Even harder to prevent in the first place, and hardest of all to win in a way that brought lasting peace rather than just setting up the next conflict. Earth had fought enough wars to fill 1,000 history books. They had won countless victories, but they had also learned that pure military victory often created more problems than it solved. Defeated enemies harbored resentment. Occupied populations bred resistance. Pyrrhic victories left both sides weakened and vulnerable. So humanity had developed a new approach. They prepared for war with absolute seriousness. They maintained overwhelming military capability, but they also looked for alternatives. Ways to achieve security without bloodshed. Ways to turn potential enemies into partners. Taman explained that Earth could have destroyed the Vexar fleet 3 months ago. It would have been relatively easy. A surprise attack while the Dominion was still mobilizing. The war would have been over before most people even knew it started. But then what? The Dominion would have been humiliated. Their military traditions shattered. Their pride destroyed. They would have spent the next century planning revenge. Instead, Earth had chosen to wait. To let the Vexar make their declaration. To let them reveal their intentions publicly in front of the entire galactic community. And then to demonstrate clearly and undeniably that humanity was not a target. Not because they were weak. Not because they were unprepared. But because they were so overwhelmingly powerful that attacking them would be suicide. Now the High Commander understood. This entire confrontation had been a lesson, not just for the Vexar Dominion, but for every species in the galaxy, a demonstration of capability without actual violence, a warning delivered through information rather than weapons. Nobody had died. No ships had been destroyed. No colonies had been threatened. But the message was absolutely clear. Taman continued speaking. He told the commander that humanity did not want to be enemies with the Vexar. Earth respected military tradition. They understood warrior cultures. They had been warriors themselves for their entire history. There was no need for conflict between them. Instead, he proposed an alternative. The Vexar Dominion had 10,000 years of military experience. They had fought 7 wars and won them all. They understood strategy and tactics. They had a proud martial tradition. All of this was valuable, but humanity had something different. They had fought thousands of wars. They understood industrial warfare. They knew about logistics, combined arms operations, intelligence gathering, special operations, and 100 other specialized fields. They had learned hard lessons over millennia of constant conflict. What if, instead of fighting each other, they shared knowledge? What if the Vexar joined Earth's mutual defense network? They could exchange tactical doctrines, share training methods, learn from each other. The Dominion could maintain their military traditions while benefiting from human experience. Earth could learn from Vexar expertise in areas where the Dominion excelled. Around the chamber, aliens were listening intently now. This was not the outcome anyone had expected. Not a war, not a humiliating surrender, but a partnership, an alliance between two military powers that would make them both stronger. Taman outlined the proposal. The Vexar would withdraw their war declaration. Earth would deactivate their combat readiness protocols. Both sides would return to peaceful postures. Then they would begin negotiations for a mutual defense treaty, not just a non-aggression pact. A real alliance with shared responsibilities and benefits. The treaty would include military exchanges, Vexar officers training with human forces, human officers learning Vexar methods, joint exercises, shared intelligence about potential threats, coordinated defensive strategies. Both civilizations would become more secure while maintaining their independence and traditions. More importantly, it would send a message to the rest of the galaxy that humanity was not interested in conquest, that they wanted partners, not subjects, that their military power was defensive, not offensive, that they could be trusted despite their overwhelming capability. The High Commander was silent for a long moment. His three eyes were focused on Taman. Around him, his advisors were whispering urgently. Calculations were being made. Implications were being considered. Pride was being weighed against pragmatism. Finally, he spoke. He asked what would happen if he refused. If the Dominion insisted on proceeding with the war despite everything they had learned today. Taman's expression became serious. Very serious. The smile was completely gone now. If the commander chose war, humanity would win. Quickly, decisively, completely. The Vexar military would be destroyed. Their colonies would be occupied. Their government would be dissolved. Earth would spend the next 50 years rebuilding Vexar civilization according to human standards. The Dominion's proud military tradition would become a historical footnote, but that was not what Earth wanted. It would be a waste of Vexar lives, a waste of their knowledge, a waste of their culture, a waste of their potential as allies. Humanity had wasted too many lives in their own history. They did not want to waste more if it could be avoided. The chamber held its breath. Every representative waited for the commander's decision. The crystal walls flickered through several colors before settling on a pale green, the color of hope, the color of new beginnings. The High Commander stood at his full height. His armor brightened to its normal purple. He raised one hand in a gesture that Taman recognized from studying Vexar customs. It was a salute. A sign of respect from one warrior to another. Acknowledgement of superior force, and acceptance of offered terms. The commander formally withdrew the declaration of war. He announced that the Vexar Dominion would be honored to explore a mutual defense treaty with Earth. He complimented humanity's military capabilities and expressed interest in learning their methods. His voice had regained its strength, but the arrogance was gone, replaced by respect. Taman bowed slightly. A human gesture of respect. He thanked the commander for his wisdom in choosing peace over war. He promised that the negotiations would be conducted with honor and good faith, that the Dominion's traditions would be respected, that this would be a partnership of equals despite the difference in military capability. Around the chamber, the tension broke like a wave. Aliens began talking excitedly. Some were already drafting messages to their governments. Others were recalculating their own diplomatic positions. Several representatives were looking at Earth with new eyes. Not as newcomers, not as primitives, but as a major power that needed to be taken seriously. The crystal walls turned bright gold, the color of celebration, the color of peaceful resolution, the color of a crisis averted. As the council chamber slowly returned to normal, as aliens filed out discussing what they had witnessed, Taman pulled out his newspaper one last time. He opened it to the back page where the opinion columns were printed. There was an editorial he had been meaning to read. It was about the importance of strong defensive capabilities combined with diplomatic wisdom. The article argued that the best way to avoid war was not to appear weak and hope nobody attacked. It was to appear so strong that attacking would be foolish, while simultaneously being reasonable enough that cooperation was attractive. Speak softly, the article concluded, but carry a very big stick, and be willing to put that stick down if a handshake would work better. Taman folded the newspaper and smiled. Humanity had learned that lesson the hard way over thousands of years. It had cost them millions of lives and countless destroyed cities, but they had learned it, and now they were teaching it to the galaxy, not through conquest, not through force, but through demonstration and partnership. The galaxy would be safer for it, and humanity would finally have what they had always wanted but never quite achieved on their own world: peace through strength, security through preparedness, friendship through mutual respect. It had taken leaving their home planet and meeting alien civilizations to finally get it right. As Taman walked out of the council chamber, newspaper tucked under his arm, he thought about that morning's sports scores. His team had indeed won,